Just a few weeks before the start of the pandemic, a Holocaust survivor from here in the North Country returned to the world's most notorious concentration camp at Auschwitz, where his parents and other family members were murdered. Vladimir Monk, a retired SUNY Plattsburgh professor, joined more than 100 other survivors for a memorial marking the 75th anniversary of the liberation of the Nazi death camp.
People walked and walked in their thousands to a mass and organized, methodical murder.
Monk traveled to Poland with his friend Julie Canepa, a writer who lives in Plattsburgh, and two filmmakers, Paul Frederick and Bruce Carlin, who had produced a documentary on his trip back to Auschwitz, where more than 1 million Jews were killed during World War II. Their film will premiere here on Mountain Lake PBS this coming Monday, January 24th at 9 p.m.
I have never been in Auschwitz since 1945. I don't know how I will feel when I'll be back. Not that I try to forget, but I try to suppress the thinking about the Holocaust and about my past. I try to live the normal life. Sometimes when I am thinking about the past, it's difficult thinking. I am a little bit afraid that when I'll be standing there and realize that over 30 of my really close relatives, including my parents, perished there, I feel a little bit low. I think that for people it's important not to only realize that it happened, but to preserve the memory of it so that the future generation who do not know anything about it, to learn about it, to see that it really existed. I'll be 95 next month. Sure, there is some risk because people of my age die for no reason at all, just for the age. I may die there. That's a risk that I have to take.
And we are so pleased now to be joined by the documentary filmmakers who followed Vladimir Monk to Auschwitz, Paul Frederick and Bruce Carlin. Welcome to you both. It's great to see you.
Thank you. Great to be here.
You traveled with Vladimir back to Auschwitz 2 years ago, January of 2020, about a month or so before the outbreak of the pandemic. A writer from Plattsburgh, Julie Canepa, accompanied Vladimir, and she had written articles about him, about his life here in Plattsburgh, about him being a Holocaust survivor, for Sun Community News, a local newspaper here in the Plattsburgh area. And she had won accolades for her coverage, and in the process, she and Vladimir developed a friendship, a bond really, and he asked her to join him on this trip to Auschwitz, and she went along, and so did you. How did you guys get involved with the project?
Our trip was January 2020, and in the year before, about January or February of 2019, Julie contacted me, and she had seen the documentary I did on William Miner's life story, and she said, you know, I've got this great story about Vladimir and his life. he's elderly, and I'd like to get his story down on tape as much as we can. So I went and did about a 2-hour interview with him, and we kind of put it on the shelf. And then about 7 or 8 months later, she called and said, "Oh, by the way, he just got asked to go back." And I was like, wow, now we've got an amazing story, you know.
You two had worked together on a number of documentaries that we have aired here on Mountain Lake PBS, but this was new and different to do a project of this magnitude.
And it wasn't scripted, so you know, a lot of times you're doing a documentary and you know the way the story ends. Especially if it's in a historical one, then you know what you're dealing with, and it's a matter of finding all the materials that you can to tell that story. But this, really the main part of the story is going to be, you know, Vladimir going back and what his reaction is and how he handles it.
This is quite an emotional trip for him, but it's also a grueling trip for him, and we see that early on in the film. Just getting there took 30 plus hours of travel. So
yeah, we had some weather delays leaving out of Montreal. We had a big snowstorm which delayed us about 6 or 7 hours. It was a red eye to start with, so we flew all night and ended up missing our connection, so then we had to make an extra stop. So yeah, it was a long journey.
And then the memorial ceremony was the next day. The memorial was held at the camp, but you went to the barracks.
The third day.
The third day.
That we were there. And we had some challenges there too. We barely got in.
Yeah, I mean, it was a huge event. I mean, it probably, with that amount of survivors, their families all being there the next day, and they had extremely tight security. And if you had anything in your paperwork that wasn't, you know, completely correct, we saw them, you know, just waving people away. The crews that had come from all over the place. I mean, we even had a communication error, an issue with them, and we got it straightened out finally, but they weren't going to let us in, and we weren't going to leave, so
standing outside
we figured
the
it
gate,
out.
like, oh boy.
Yeah.
So once you got that cleared up, you had just a few hours to shoot the gist of the documentary.
Right. You just do what you got to do, and people have asked, you know, what was it like being there? And it's such a powerful place, but we were in this mode of getting the work done that we had to get, that it wasn't until, I think, that night for sure, but months later where it still kind of resonated with what that place is and what we experienced. And to be there with Vladimir was just, you know, probably the most powerful moment of my career for sure.
And you told the story partly through Julie accompanying Vladimir there, and that really helped tell the story.
Being storytellers, and we need to try to tell this story in a different way that other returning to concentration camp documentaries have done, which has been a lot more first person, or the ones that I've seen. And so this is also through Julie's eyes, and Julie is, she's not Jewish, she's a woman, and having that perspective through her life's view of this, and having written all of this and knowing Vladimir very intimately, as far as really, writing a biography on he and his wife's life, she was now seeing things that he had seen firsthand, and we were seeing things, and it just is, as Paul said, it's hard to put it into words, the feeling that you get when you're in, such a place of evil.
How difficult of a decision was it for him to go back there?
I think he had been asked to go back 1 or 2 times before. For every 5th year, they have a big remembrance. And for some reason, I think it might have been that Julie was working on this book and he wanted to bring her so she could experience it firsthand. And I think that might have been why he decided it was time to go back. And luckily, he said okay to us tagging along, which, it's an emotional and powerful thing for him to even go back, but to have camera crews there. We're pretty low key. It was literally just the 2 of us, and we're traveling with a backpack and a small camera, and you know, he got to know us a little bit from interviews we did beforehand, and he felt comfortable enough that, you know, he said, come along. And I think the importance of preserving this story outweighed any inconvenience of having us there. Auschwitz II Birkenau is where he was. He had never seen Auschwitz I when he was there. So when we got to Auschwitz II, I think that is when it really became emotional for everybody.
Those would have been the barracks where he lived.
Right.
The majority of people went to Auschwitz-Birkenau, the second place. They were selected as Vladimir was selected and his parents. And, you know, if you were selected to go to the one direction, you were going to be murdered right away. You know, within hours you were dead.
And that's what happened to his father right there on the train platform, you know, and we got there with him, and he wanted to walk at that. I was probably two hours in of our 4 or 5 hours of shooting, and he wanted to walk, and he was driven by a force and a power behind him, and he was reliving it. But like he said, it's changed a lot. A lot of the barracks are now basically the foundational frame. But there was enough that he experienced that it was very strong and emotional.
How emotional was it for him? That's where he lost both his parents. Was there also anger?
Yeah, he definitely was angry at points. I don't know, how could you not be, you know? But he is very, you know, he says what's on his mind. If he's feeling something, he feels like he has to want to talk about it. But he was quiet a lot and just looking and absorbing.
Yeah, and that's part of the reason why having Julie there and having Julie sort of interpret what he was going through really made sense for the structure of our documentary. He's just a very stoic person, so a lot of it, I think, is locked away.
He didn't participate in survivor groups and constantly bring this up to his children. He didn't tell his kids anything about it until they were teenagers. And it's, you know, remarkable when both the mother and the father were survivors of concentration camps, that it wasn't something that they felt they did not want to burden their children with feeling that, you know, they should be so lucky because they survived and they didn't have to face this. They felt, you know, blessed to have survived, but they weren't going to let that define them. And I think, and you know, as you survive and you live, you know, you have to make those decisions about how often are you going to revisit these things that, you know, were so traumatic and so devastating.
He did, though, on occasion, speak to school groups and to school kids about his experiences. And he said that he wanted them to know what he had been through. He wanted them to know this story, to keep this story alive.
Yeah, once he retired from being a professor, that's when he started to go to the schools and tell his story. And I think, exactly, I think that's part of why he agreed to letting us do this documentary, is because he wants this to not be forgotten. We had a couple showings in Plattsburgh at the Strand Theater, and they were a week apart. And after the second showing, we were going up on the stage to answer some questions, and he said to me, he goes, I'm not sure I can watch that again. So he, you know, it's got to be powerful. You're seeing your family, you're seeing your life story, you're seeing everything unfold, and I think it's, I know he's happy we did it.
And so I think the very first time he saw it, he was, you know, surprised that his actual whole life story was there. I think he thought it was going to be all about the trip,
yeah,
and not as much about, but
his life story.
You know, his life story was so interesting and powerful that it really needed to be told, how he ended up in the concentration camps and then what happened, you know, in his life afterwards, right up through the present day. And you know, he's doing well now. I mean, he'll be 97 in February.
Thank you for producing
Thank you.
such a wonderful film and sharing it with us. Again, it's coming up Monday night at 9 o'clock here on Mountain Lake PBS. Paul Frederick, Bruce Carlin, thank you very much for taking the time.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Tom.